May 2009. You'd hardly suspect anything extraordinary in the terraced homes of Anfield, Liverpool. But behind the doors of one unassuming household, a family enterprise was quietly turning local misery into massive profit. This was the Whitney Gang, a tightly bound web of siblings and cousins trafficking heroin and crack cocaine with near military coordination. The streets knew their name long before we did, and when we finally pulled back the curtain, what we found was as methodical as it was horrifying. The Whitneys didn't need to build a cartel, they inherited one. At the center was Emma Mackenzie, her brother Paul Whitney, and a cast of relatives who ran the operation like a family business. No outsiders, no leaks. For years, they operated like ghosts, leaving behind only overdoses and broken homes. Their drug network spread like mold through the estates, supplying the most vulnerable users while staying just far enough from the chaos they caused. It was the kind of case that doesn't start with gunshots or flashy violence, but with whispers, suspicious patterns, and too many addicts returning to the same houses. Our intel suggested something larger was at play. Not just low-level dealers, but an actual family structure behind the flow. A structure that laundered cash, controlled supply routes, and used kids as pawns. You probably can't even imagine the full scale of it. And we couldn't yet prove it, but we would. So before we get started, I'll ask you to subscribe to the channel and put a like on the video if you really like what I'm doing. Let me know in the comments what you think after watching, especially about the way this family operated in plain sight. What kind of upbringing twists a family into a criminal syndicate? We didn't need wiretaps to know something was wrong on Ridgemont Avenue. Locals whispered about people coming and going at all hours, cars idling for moments before vanishing, and strange men loitering near playgrounds. When we started mapping it out, it became clear. The Whitneys had turned their own homes, and several across the neighborhood, into working drug dens. These weren't stash spots hidden away in alleyways. These were front rooms with toys on the floor and heroin in the sofa. They'd taken the community hostage slowly, bit by bit, one addict at a time, one family home converted into a graft house. Their approach was cynical but effective. Move the gear in familiar, family-friendly packaging. Women with babies, kids riding bikes with wraps tucked into handlebars. One teenage boy was caught delivering crack concealed in a McDonald's Happy Meal box. These weren't coincidences. This was doctrine. To control such a network, the Whitneys relied on loyalty forged by blood and fear. Emma Mackenzie didn't just supervise operations. She gave orders with an iron calm, while her brother Paul Whitney orchestrated deliveries and recruitment. Cousins manned corners. Nieces and nephews passed phones and product. Outsiders were rare, and usually disposable. The family's DNA was stitched through every layer of the trade. They weren't flashy, no designer cars or champagne parties, just steady, invisible profit. Money flowed in, quiet and consistent. Some of it was laundered through local barbers and tanning salons. Some was simply stored in attics and wardrobes. But every pound came from suffering. Every gram was sold with the knowledge that it would wreck a life. What's more chilling, a violent gang or one that hides behind lullabies and laundry lines? We knew we couldn't move too early. To take down an operation this embedded, we had to build the case layer by layer. So we launched a covert surveillance operation under the code name Operation Malton. It began with eyes in the shadows, fixed point observations, unmarked cars, plainclothes officers posted outside key addresses in Anfield and Everton. Day after day we watched. We noted deliveries, tracked couriers, and mapped supply chains like veins pulsing through the neighborhood. But watching wasn't enough. We needed ears. With a court warrant, we installed audio devices in key vehicles and homes. What came back was a web of coded conversations and drug deal logistics, disguised as everyday banter. Half a Benji for the dog meant 50 pounds worth of heroin. Sort that girl with a fizzy referred to crack sales. Incriminating, yes, but not yet enough to tie the leaders to the product physically. They were smart. Orders came in via burner phones, passed through 3 or 4 hands, and only then reached the street dealers. Then came the jackpot. One of the younger Whitney cousins slipped. He made a call from a tapped line, confused the code, and mentioned Paul Whitney's name while arranging a drop. Just like that, the chain had a clear link to the top. A second breakthrough followed when a known addict-turned-informant offered us access to one of the gang's graft phones in exchange for protection. We recovered hundreds of contacts, order messages, and pricing codes. From that moment, things accelerated. The data matched the movements we'd re-recorded on foot. The faces matched the voices. The homes matched the stashes. It was like fitting the final pieces into a sick, intricate puzzle. What would you do if you had to watch destruction unfold in slow motion, knowing that acting too fast could ruin everything? We began pulling threads, and they led us straight into the Whitney's inner logistics. One after another, we identified stash flats, often rented in the names of vulnerable addicts. Inside, we found rooms stripped of furniture, save for one table, some scales, and enough cling film to wrap 100 parcels. These were the gang's packaging plants. At one address, the living room floor was coated in white residue, its air reeking of ammonia and plastic. Children's toys sat forgotten in the corner, a tragic backdrop to this industrial misery. The Whitneys ran it like clockwork. Crack and heroin were processed in bulk, portioned into 10 pounds and 20 pounds wraps, and handed off to runners for street-level sales. Most of the couriers were young, some just 14 or 15. They worked shifts, answered to burner phones, and rarely saw the product source. That was the genius of it. The family stayed insulated. Paul Whitney and his lieutenants never touched the drugs directly. They orchestrated from a safe distance. We discovered several graft phones in use simultaneously, often for just a few weeks before being swapped out. Texts were blunt, rapid, and coded. Brown, white, 2 for 15, ready now. Even the timestamps told stories. Peak hours were late afternoon to early evening, right when kids got out of school. There was something especially cruel about that. One girl, no older than 17, was stopped near Sefton Park with a Kinder Egg capsule in her sock. Inside, 12 wraps of heroin. She had no criminal record, no clue who Paul Whitney was, just a phone number and a promise of 50 pounds cash. It wasn't just the drugs, it was the system, a network designed to devour the poor and discard the young. What kind of leader builds an empire on the backs of children? If the foot soldiers were young, the couriers were trusted and often family. This was where the Whitneys tightened their grip. Unlike many gangs that rely on hired muscle or freelancers, the Whitneys used bloodlines as their security system. Female members weren't just involved, they were instrumental. Emma Mackenzie, Paul's sister, played a central role not only in coordination but in physically transporting Class A drugs across Merseyside. She wasn't alone. One of the most audacious moments came when officers tailed a vehicle driven by a heavily pregnant woman, later identified as another Whitney relative. She was stopped near Widnes with 2 children in the back seat. Hidden in the lining of the baby's pram were dozens of wraps of heroin and crack, vacuum-sealed and masked with baby powder to throw off scent dogs. She claimed she was just heading to Tesco, but the packaging told another story. That load alone had a street value close to 5,000 pounds. It became clear that women in the family were used to exploit the assumption of innocence. One wore maternity clothes long after giving birth, padding her belly to hide wraps during deliveries. Another stashed product inside sanitary towel packets in her handbag. A third used her toddler's snack tin to ferry rocks of crack between estates. To most officers, it would have looked like a trip to the corner shop. That was the design, camouflage in broad daylight. But beneath the surface was a ruthless supply chain, where every member knew the risks and took them anyway. Because in this family, silence was loyalty, and loyalty was expected, no matter what you were hiding or where you were hiding it. What does it take to convince your own sister to risk her baby for your drug empire? For months, the Whitneys operated without a hitch. But in crime, it only takes one moment of complacency. One evening, patrol officers in Toxteth pulled over a silver Vauxhall Corsa. Nothing fancy, just another car among thousands. Inside were two known addicts acting nervous. In the glove box, multiple wraps of heroin, a burner phone still warm from recent use, and, critically, a handwritten note with partial addresses and nicknames. One of those names, P. Witt. That minor stop was the first visible crack in the facade. The seized burner phone went straight to our cyber unit. Within hours, it connected to a graphed line we had been monitoring for weeks. Suddenly, the voices we'd recorded had names. The drop-offs we'd tracked had timestamps. And for the first time, the family's command structure began to take shape. Around the same time, an intercepted prison call confirmed our suspicions. Paul Whitney had been in touch with an inmate recently released from HMP Liverpool, coordinating fresh runners and distribution routes through coded language. The call, monitored legally, referenced a wedding next week, and bridesmaids all dressed. Harmless, unless you knew bridesmaids referred to new couriers, and the wedding was a large heroin consignment coming through Wavertree. From there, the walls closed in quickly. We pulled more phones, tracked more vehicles, and deployed surveillance on additional Whitney homes. One car alone had 13,000 pounds worth of heroin hidden beneath a child's booster seat. That level of confidence meant they felt untouchable. And, for a while, they were. But once the case threads began to overlap, the truth became inescapable. No one in that family was clean, and every move they made was another page in the evidence file we were building. What finally breaks a criminal dynasty? Greed, arrogance, or just bad luck? June 2nd, 2011. At 5 a.m., under the cover of morning fog, we moved in. Operation Malton was no longer a quiet investigation. It was a coordinated strike. Armed with arrest warrants, breach tools, and a tactical plan months in the making, we hit 11 properties across Merseyside in synchronized raids. No more watching, no more listening. It was time to take the Whitneys down. At the Ridgemont Avenue property, Emma Mackenzie was found in her dressing gown, phone still in hand. Her last message sent just minutes before entry. At another address, Paul Whitney attempted to flee through a back garden before being tackled by plainclothes officers. In a loft space above a child's bedroom, we uncovered a shoebox packed with heroin, burner phones, and 8,000 pounds in elastic-bound cash. Two cousins were pulled from cars before sunrise, still wearing their delivery clothes. We recovered 15 burner phones, multiple graphline devices, over 30,000 pounds in cash, and a combined street value of more than 160,000 pounds in heroin and crack cocaine. But the bigger win, the complete dismantling of the command hierarchy. With our surveillance, audio, and digital evidence, we no longer had just a gang. We had roles, responsibilities, proof of leadership, and enough material to prosecute the entire network. The community watched in silence. Some cheered from behind curtains, others cried. In the wake of the raids, we opened hotlines for vulnerable teens and children coerced into running for the gang. Over a dozen came forward. Many had been too scared to speak until that morning. The illusion had shattered. The myth of Whitney invincibility gone in a day. But what justice can truly undo years of fear, addiction, and family betrayal? The courtroom was packed, not with supporters, but with silence. One by one, the Whitneys stood before the judge. Paul Whitney, Emma Mackenzie, Anthony Tony Whitney, Gary Whitney, Carol Whitney, and others. A total of 8 family members faced charges ranging from conspiracy to supply Class A drugs to possession with intent and money laundering. The prosecution painted a grim but undeniable picture: a family that had poisoned their own streets for profit, with full knowledge of the devastation they caused. The evidence was airtight: hundreds of text messages, audio recordings from graft phones, surveillance footage, cash seizures, courier testimonies, and the phone call from prison, the linchpin. The jury took mere hours to deliberate. Sentencing day arrived like a storm. Paul Whitney, the ringleader, was handed 10 years and 9 months. Emma Mackenzie, 8 years. Gary Whitney, 9 years and 4 months. Carol Whitney, 8 years. Tony Whitney, 9 years and 8 months. Altogether, the family received a combined 82 years in prison. The court described their actions as a deliberate and sustained criminal enterprise run with chilling familiarity. Some showed no emotion, others cried, not for remorse, but for the collapse of everything they built. Even behind bars, the family remained tight-lipped. No apologies, no cooperation, no breakdown of loyalty. In their silence, they held on to the last piece of control they had left. But their empire was gone. Stash houses cleared, graft lines shut, young couriers placed into safeguarding programs. The streets of Anfield and Everton would never forget them, but at least, for a moment, they could breathe again. This case was closed, but in our line of work, nothing stays quiet for long. This empire was collapsed, but as soon as one is destroyed, a new one is born. Somewhere right now, a new drug trafficking empire is rising, and we have to fight it.